What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my channel and not welcome back. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button because you will not be disappointed unless, of course, your taste level is lacking. And if that's the case, I really don't have any advice for you because I cannot relate to such a struggle. Everybody else, hi, hello. I hope you are well. It's been a minute, I feel, since I've done the Beyond Belief Fact or Fiction, but really I just skipped one so I could get that African American folklore video for y'all, which I will be working on another one since y'all liked it so much. I loved it, so yeah. And if you are new here, I'm about to tell you a couple of stories which will be paired with an animation, and you will be left to guess which ones are fact and which ones are fiction. And of course, at the end of the video, I'll give you your answers and we'll see how you did. Before I get started though, I want to say March 1st was my 3-year lock anniversary and I love him so much. I love when y'all compliment my locks. Like, I just want to say thank you to everybody who has complimented my locks during this journey. I cannot believe it's been 3 years. Shout out to the girls and guys that didn't believe in me, because now I'm thinking about Miss Girl in the comments who said her man said my hair went locked. Excuse me? Clink, clink. Girl, show him that, girl. Make sure he see my hair. Anyway, let me stop running my mouth and get into story number 1. So back in July of 2015, I was 19 years old hanging out with some friends. One friend, Will, had just gotten a new gun and wanted to go target practice in his dad's cabin in Caliente, California. Very isolated, and the cabin is far from any neighbors, far from the main road, and there is nothing around. His dad's cabin is a man cave equipped with a whole shooting range, and it was so remote that they have to park their car off of the main road, take a short walk to where they park an ATV, and then drive the ATV about a little over a mile or so up to the house. It took quite a bit to get there, but we were all excited and knew it would be worth all of the traveling and the trip. Finally, we reached the cabin and a man comes out of nowhere while we're unloading the ATV, and he's just standing there not saying anything. Will was inside the house, and we figured that this must be someone in the family, or at least familiar, because his family owned the land and there would be no other reason for anyone else to be on it. We greet the man, but he does not greet us back. He just continues to stare, and then he begins walking toward us slowly. As he gets closer, we can see that he had a pretty big rifle and a large hunting knife. Maybe he was sneaking and hunting on the land and had not expected to run into anyone, but still, his eerie silence was very worrisome. Will comes out of the house and he's like, "What the hell? What are you doing here?" and tells the man he's trespassing. But the guy continues to move toward us with a slow and steady pace. Will repeats himself, and the guy raises his rifle toward the 3 of us and starts mumbling something loud enough for us to hear him, but not clear enough for us to understand. He tells us that he was dropped there by the government, right there in the woods from space, in a body bag. And he's very paranoid about who we are and if we're affiliated with the government or if we had also been dropped there. We try to assure him that we are no threat to him whatsoever, and we just come there to the cabin to have a good, non-problematic time, but it doesn't seem to soothe him at all. With his gun raised, he forces us into the cabin, and we do as we are instructed, terrified of what's to come. And all I could think about was the fact that I didn't even tell my parents where I was going today. I didn't tell anyone. Inside, he forces the 3 of us down on our knees and walks around us in a slow and eerie pace. He then takes the barrel of his weapon and presses it right up against our friend James's forehead, puts his finger on the trigger, and loudly goes bang, pushing James's head back with the weapon at the same time. Then he does the same to us too, telling us that he could have easily taken us out one by one and gotten away with it, that nobody's close enough to hear the shot, and that hunting is so common in the area that even if somebody did hear them, they wouldn't think anything of it. We knew it was true. He even contemplated out loud whether or not he would bother to bury us or let the elements and wildlife do the work of disposing us for him. He says that in the event that we are discovered, they would never know it was him. Then he walks out of the cabin and goes out to the ATV where James and I had left our phones. Will quickly grabs at his in an attempt to dial 911, but to no surprise, we didn't have a signal. We could hear some commotion coming from outside, but we knew he hadn't gone far and would be back any second. Will suggests that because we outnumber him, we should try to ambush him when he comes back in and make a run for it. James and I quickly shut that idea down. Odds are that at least one of us is bound to be hurt pretty badly or even worse, killed during that plan. The man comes back into the cabin with 2 butane tanks and sets them there on the floor in front of us. then lights himself a cigarette and offers each of us one, which we all take even though none of us were smokers. If ever there was a time we figured would be appropriate, it was right now. All four of us take a few puffs, and then the guy sits on top of one of the butane tanks and starts telling us some of the wildest things we had ever heard. How he knows the devil and he had died once, but the devil brought him back to life. How he was once married and it was a terrible toxic relationship. We allow him to just ramble on for the most part, offering one-word replies and head nods here and there. And then he tells us that we're good people and we're his friends now, and even tells us that he loves and respects us dearly, but despite that, he is still going to kill us all today. Figuring that we could possibly talk him out of this, we began to talk more, telling him that he raises a lot of good points regarding his marriage and entertaining his delusions of being dropped there from space in a body bag by the government, and of course his personal relationship with the devil himself. We try to share things about ourselves to hopefully gain some mercy, make him like us enough not to kill us. He talks with us for a while before taking his bag to the kitchen and filling it up with canned goods, water from the cupboard, and then it dawned on me what had likely happened. This man is just living off the grid in the woods, entering into different cabins, gathering food and supplies, and we likely arrived at Will's dad's cabin at the same time as him. And with the distance between this cabin and the next, and him being a little off his rocker, he'd rather get rid of us than simply go on to the next. And he was probably thinking that he had no other choice. So I offered him the opportunity to take anything he needed and however much, and the guys join in. We tell him that we'll allow him to leave and we'll forget this ever happened. And he says no. Then Will ups the offer. He tells the man that we brought more weapons and plenty ammo out to target practice, and that he can even have the ATV as well, and we'll walk back to the main road where our car is. And the man appears to ponder this idea while we silently pray that he accepts. We did make him a pretty good offer. And then he says, "You guys are just trying to bullshit me. There's no way you would allow me to take all of this and simply leave without calling the police. You're just saying anything to survive." And yeah, we were. But we really were gonna let him walk or ride away with whatever he wanted. So we try to convince him that we are not bullshitting him on the deal. At that point, he tells us, "You know what? I respect you guys, and that's why I'm gonna let you guys live." And he shakes my hand. He then packs up the ATV with everything he saw and wanted, and a few moments after we heard it crank up and drive away, we got up from the floor and ran out of that cabin as fast as we possibly could. We walked through the woods, headed back toward the main road, which was quite the distance even on the ATV earlier. Every crack and rustling of the leaves had us looking over our shoulders, afraid to look back and see him. It wasn't long before we lost sunlight, which made matters worse, but finally we do reach the main road. And now it's just a matter of knowing exactly how far down we have to walk from this point where we made it out of the woods to where the car is. About 5 minutes or so into our walk, the sound of an approaching vehicle and headlights come up from behind us. And it was him driving the ATV up the road. We quickly dove over into the woods and laid down in the leaves to try to hide. And he had definitely seen us walking because he pulled over the ATV on the side of the road, got off with a flashlight, and looked for us. He walked alongside the road. We heard his footsteps in the grass, laid there extremely still, and just prayed. And luckily for us, finally, after about a minute or so, he gets back on the ATV and drives away. We laid there until we could no longer hear the ATV's engine before getting up and continuing on our walk back to our car. Then James becomes very sick. He's barely able to walk. He's just not in good shape at all, and we figured that he was likely dehydrated and of course scared out of his mind. So we have to hold him up, which of course slows us down a bit, and then we realize that an entirely different threat has been unlocked. There are coyotes, mountain lions, rattlesnakes, and all other kinds of wildlife out at this time of night. We keep walking, and then again we see headlights, this time coming from ahead of us. And initially our instincts told us to hide again, but these headlights looked a lot bigger than those of an ATV. It was a truck that stopped right before us on the road, and we couldn't see a thing through the brightness of the headlights, but we did recognize the voice as soon as we heard it. "What are you guys doing out here?" It was Will's dad. Of course, Will had told his father that we were heading up here, and after not receiving a response or hearing from Will all day, he decided to come up and make sure everything was okay. Will had never in his life been happier to see his father. We got into the truck and Will told his dad everything that had happened. James and I just too in shock to utter a word. And he did, of course, take us to report it to the police. Several days later, police are scouring the area for that man or any evidence of him when they run across a water bottle that had been drunken from and left behind. They tested for DNA and get a positive hit. We're able to confirm that this is the man that had held us hostage using one of his previous mugshots that were in the system, where he'd been arrested for burglary. After searching for 18 days, the man is located and dies in a shootout with the police. Fair warning, this one is long as hell. Apologies for that. But this is very hard for me and I've been carrying it for a lot of years. On the advice of my therapist, I've written it all out to try to work out my feelings on it. I've struggled with this for a long time and I need to hear other people's opinion on it. I know I did wrong on some things, probably a lot of things, but I tried to do the best I could. My son was troubled, very troubled. If you've seen the movie We Need to Talk About Kevin, it will really help to understand what I'm talking about, because I swear to God, when I watched that film, I thought I was watching a documentary of my life. I felt like the writer must have had cameras hidden in my damn house. That's how accurate it was. The only difference is that in the movie, the boy appears normal to his father and only reveals his true nature to his mother. With my son, he didn't have that mask. His insane behavior was the same with everyone. From the day he was born, my son just came out wrong. He was playing, my wife and I tried to get pregnant, and we were ecstatic when he was born. He was wanted, he was loved, we showered affection on him and really tried to give him a happy childhood. But from the day we brought him home from the hospital, he was miserable. He cried for 13 months straight. I am not exaggerating. 13 months without a break. He cried until he had no voice left and kept crying. You could see his little face scrunched up and no sound coming out, totally hoarse. There were times he would literally be crying in his sleep. I've never seen or heard of any other little kid able to do that. We brought him to doctors, specialists, tried changing his diet, held him, rocked him, toys, swaddling, music, tablets, everything we could think of, and nothing worked. 13 months of grating, grinding, no sleep hell. Once he got over the crying stage, we thought we were out of the woods. After a while, he figured out how to get his diaper off and took great pleasure in relieving himself anywhere and on anything he could. Quickly, it became clear that for some unknown reason, he was just angry at being alive. I never saw that kid have a genuine, joyous smile once in the time I knew him. Now, I did see a grin, a vicious, horrible grin many times while he was taking a perverse pleasure from causing pain or suffering. But a smile from real pleasure at something nice? Never. He had no interest in anything positive. He was fueled by hate, and everything he did was bent toward that. And as soon as he can walk, his mission in life was to destroy things. He would break or try to break anything that came in his range, smash it, chew it, throw it in the toilet, whatever he could to destroy it. After a while, he figured out he could hide it, and so he started relieving himself in places we wouldn't find right away. He would grind it into the carpet, making it even more of a problem to clean and making the house smell terrible. When he got older, between the ages of 19 to 15, he would relieve himself in our bed until we got a lock on our door and he wasn't able to get in anymore. And then he would just do it in the hallway right in front of our door. The biological warfare started around 2.5 years old, and he never grew out of that. I try to speed it up because I could literally go on for days about this stuff, but as he grew older, he became more and more unmanageable. He would bite, kick, scream, scratch, and spit at anyone trying to do anything with him. He was kicked out of school twice before the age of 9. Then they let him back in and then kicked him out for good. The next school put him in a special class that kept him away from the other students. We had to install a door and a lock on the kitchen because he would steal knives and use them to gouge the walls, furniture, or chase people with them. When he was 10, he stabbed me pretty good in the hip and the ass. I still have the scars. As he grew older, he grew darker. He moved into setting things on fire and torturing local animals. There was a stray dog that hung around at the park near our house, and my son blinded it in one eye with a barbecue fork. He would dip cats' tails in gasoline and light them on fire. He became a violent, stinking, vicious beast that lived in our house, and we couldn't do anything with him. Yes, we had the kid in therapy. He saw a psychiatrist twice a week and had God knows how many different medications prescribed to him. Over the years, nothing worked. Therapy didn't work. Meds didn't work. Nothing worked. He was like a poison cloud of hate and fury, lashing out at anything in his reach. When my son was 16, my wife got pregnant again, and I can't tell you how different our reaction was, and instead of joy, we felt horror. This pregnancy had not been planned, and we were really at a loss over what to do. What if this was part 2? Our son had been such an unending nightmare for 16 years. We couldn't take the idea of starting again from the beginning. We talked a lot about terminating, but A, access to abortion was not as easy in those days. And B, my wife was very against it. We talked about many options, and in the end, we decided that my wife would have the baby, and if it turned out evil, we would put it up for adoption. We knew we just couldn't do it again with another child like our son. We had a daughter, and she was normal. Suddenly, we saw what our lives should have been like the whole time, how things would have been had our son not been himself. She laughed at things. She breastfed without biting. She didn't have teeth yet anyway, but you could tell she was just trying to eat and not tear her mom's breast off. After 4 months, she was sleeping throughout the night. She was happy. She was normal. I cannot describe the relief my wife and I felt, and the happiness, I don't have the words for it. And this is where I believe that I may have started pulling back from my son. Up until that time, whatever mistakes I made, I had always tried to do the best for my son, and I'm convinced of that. I really tried to love him and care for him. I really did try, but when my daughter was born, my wife and I both instinctively just turned toward her and slightly away from him. She became our focus, not from malice, but just because she was so much easier. She was so happy and so sweet, and every moment we were with her, it was like magic. And I understand that this was wrong, but we honestly could not help it. I don't have a better explanation than that. My son hadn't given a shit about my wife being pregnant. I honestly don't know if he even really understood it, but when we brought our daughter home, he started acting out even more. And I didn't even think that was possible, but he took it up another notch. At this time, he was 17, and we were having blowout screaming matches daily. And usually after we fought, he would storm out of the house and disappear for hours at a time, or come back the next morning. And honestly, that was a relief. I started to actually look forward to our fights because it would get him away from us for a little while. Not long after the birth of our daughter, my relationship with our son was almost completely gone. Our only real interactions were us screaming at each other, and my wife was even worse with him. She just had nothing left. By that time, if our son even came into the same room as her, she would just stop whatever she was doing and start screaming at him to get away from her and get out until he left, like screaming at the top of her lungs. He started spending more and more time out of the house, which was a blessing for us all. And I have no idea what he was up to out in the world, but we were just happy it wasn't being inflicted upon us. As a consequence of our son's behavior, we had invested heavily in locks around our house. All of the cheap, thin interior doors in our home had been replaced with thick, dense wood doors that couldn't be kicked through, equipped with keyed locks that my wife and I carried keys to. And I know it sounds extreme, but locks and heavy doors were the best way we found to create safe spaces from him. And to be clear, I was not locking my son in rooms like a prisoner. He had free range of the house and could come and go as he pleased. He just didn't have access to our personal rooms. We would lock ourselves in our rooms to protect ourselves from him, and if anything, we were the prisoners in our own home. Now, on one particular morning, I had fought with my son in the morning, and he had left the house in a rage. My wife and I were enjoying some peace and quiet in the kitchen while our daughter napped in her bedroom, and then our daughter began to cry. Any parent who has young children can tell you, you get used to your child's cries, and you can tell after a while what they need. They cry differently if they are hungry or need changing, or if they're just restless or want to be held. Babies can communicate pretty well before they can speak. And this cry was none of those things. This cry was terror. The second we heard it, my wife and I were both up out of our chairs and running to the room. The door was locked, of course, and it took a few seconds to get the right key to get it open. And when we did, my son was in the room. He had climbed in the window to get to her. He was standing over her crib with a steak knife in his hand, and I had no idea where he got it. It wasn't one of ours. We controlled our knives very carefully and always kept them in locked drawers. I think he may have broken into a neighbor's house and stolen it from them. And he had broken her skin twice already, once in the belly area and once on her arm. From both wounds, there was blood pouring down. When I entered the room, he was dragging the back of the knife down her face, not cutting, almost tickling her with it, teasing her while she screamed. And he looked up at us and grinned. Before I knew it, I was already moving toward him. I didn't think about it. I just moved instinctively. But even with that, my wife got there faster, and it was like a movie on fast forward. She got to our son and knocked the knife across the room and then pushed him with the entirety of her body weight so hard that she knocked him into the wall. I can remember the look in his eyes so vividly. There was nothing, no emotion, no light. And I watched as my wife took a step toward him, and I could have reached out and stopped her, but I didn't. She stepped very close to him, waited looking at him for maybe 3 to 5 seconds without moving or saying anything before taking all of her strength and punching him in the face. Neither of us had laid a hand on our son in anger before, but something broke in her that day, and I guess all of her frustration just came pouring out. When she hit him, his head snapped back and blood started pouring out of his nose. He hardly reacted. He just looked at her with this shocked expression like he didn't know how to process what had just happened. She waited another second or two and then she punched him again. And I could have reached out and stopped her again. I could have dragged her out of the room, taken her away, calmed her down, but I didn't. I just stood there and watched. She hit him again and over and over. He put his hands up trying to block, and he started screaming, crying out, yelling for her to stop. And it was the most genuine reaction I'd ever seen him have to anything in his whole entire life. But she was not stopping. She hit him harder. And finally, he tried to swing at her, but he missed. I brought my daughter out of the room and into the kitchen, and when I inspected her further, I saw that he had also cut her a third time on the sole of her little foot. All the cuts were superficial. I cleaned her up and held her until she calmed down and put little band-aids over her cuts. In our bedroom, I could hear my son screaming, calling my wife horrible names, telling her he would cut her head off and her corpse. And then I didn't hear anything else from him. He didn't say anything else. I didn't hear him cry out. And I assumed that she must have knocked him out at that point. But I could still hear her hitting him. And she continued to beat him for a long time. Long enough for my daughter to drift off to sleep in my arms. And I just sat at the kitchen table waiting for her to come out of the room. Finally she did, and she sat down at the table across from me. Her hands were swollen and red, and her face and arms were splattered with blood. Her chest was heaving, and we just stared at each other without saying anything. After a while, I asked her if he was dead, and she looked back at me and answered, "I fucking hope so." I nodded. That was all there was to say about that. I understood how she felt perfectly. I felt the same, but neither of us knew what to do at that point, so we just sat there in silence. And after a few moments, my wife started to cry, and then she left to go take a shower, and I just stayed there holding our daughter. And after a while, I heard moaning and sobbing coming from our daughter's room. It turned out that my son was not dead. I went in to see how bad it was, and it was pretty bad. I've never seen a more merciless beating laid onto anyone before or since. He was laying on the floor, rolling around, blood leaking out of his face. He was lying in a pool of vomit. His nose was squashed flat across his face, and both of his eyes were completely swollen shut and had started to blacken already. And I could see that a couple of his fingers were bent out at weird angles, and he had pissed his pants. I suspected that he had been missing teeth, but I couldn't see any on the floor, and I couldn't see inside of his mouth because his lips were so puffed up and swollen. When my wife came out of the shower, I still didn't know what to do about our son. I didn't know whether to call the police or an ambulance, to take him to the hospital myself. I honestly didn't have any idea what to do. And after a while, I realized I simply don't care what happened to him anymore. And we decided to just let him live or die on his own. There was an in-law suite in the basement that we had never really put to use. My wife, daughter, and I just moved down there. Everything we wanted to live with, we moved downstairs and basically bunkered ourselves in, separating our lives from him completely. There was plenty of food upstairs in the cabinets, enough for a couple of weeks or more. He had a washroom and bedrooms to use. We had a washroom in the basement, a small kitchenette, and a separate entrance so we could just stop going upstairs altogether. We just decided we were done with him. I figured we'd let his food run out and see what happened from there. And over the next week, we could hear him moving around upstairs sometimes. I think he just spent most of his time lying in bed recovering. I went to work watching on high alert in case he had attacked me in the driveway or outside, but he never did. My wife stayed home with our daughter. She was never out of our sight. One night we heard him going ballistic, smashing things and banging. We did not respond, and he had never tried to get downstairs or get near us though. I think he was afraid that if he got near us again, my wife might finish the job. After 3 weeks down in the basement, we hadn't heard anything from up above for a few days, and I ventured upstairs to the main floor of the house. The place was demolished, and there was no sign of my son. He was gone. It took months to repair the damage he had done and get the main floor back to normal again. There was food and shit smeared all over the walls, broken glass on the floor, big holes in the drywall. He had ripped the place apart. He tore up the linoleum in a corner of the kitchen and emptied an entire foam fire extinguisher into the living room. I feel thankful that he didn't burn the house down with us in it. I'm honestly not sure why he didn't. The kid wasn't shy about lighting things on fire at all. After that, I lived in fear every day that he would come back. They would ambush us out of the blue and try to kill us. We moved out of the house about 3 years later, and I finally stopped being afraid that he would show up again, because then he had no idea where we were. I finally felt safe from him. All this happened a long time ago. My son was born in the spring of 1971. My daughter was born in 88. I'm an old man now. I'll be 70 this year. My wife passed from cancer in 2016. I've got 2 granddaughters, and they are the joy of my life. I see a therapist a couple of times a month to talk about all this. I don't know where my son is. The last time I saw him was when he was lying on the floor of our daughter's bedroom. I haven't heard from him since he left more than 30 years ago now, and I don't want to. I carry a lot of guilt from that time and a lot of conflicting emotions. I didn't beat him myself, but I allowed him to be beaten, and I thought he deserved it. I was happy it happened. I didn't try to kill him, but I would have been happy if he died. I will say that I do hope he was able to overcome his demons and go live a normal life somewhere. If he wasn't able to do that, if he stayed the way he was, then I truly do hope someone out there killed him. When I knew him, he was a rabid dog, and whichever way it went, I just hope he wasn't still out there hurting anybody else. Now, for the answers. Story number 1, A Cabin in the Woods. If you guessed that this was something that I completely made up, you will be incorrect. This is a true story. It really happened. I didn't even change anything. I left the story as it was. I actually left out a part of it because I felt like if I told y'all all the details up front, y'all would just clock me and say, oh girl, this is way too detailed and chaotic, like this had to have happened, because who would make this up? I don't know, that's how I felt. So let me give you the missing piece. Now, 2 days after the guy, and this is him. So this is the sketch. This is the sketch that they had, and these are the mug shots that the boys were able to positively identify him with. Now, is the sketch looking like the mug shots to y'all? I don't know. But this guy, 2 days after he held these young men hostage, he had several priors from breaking and entering and stealing people's stuff. Benjamin Peter Ashley. The ATV got stuck in a rut and he couldn't get it out, so he was back on foot. He goes to another cabin. It was a Thursday evening, and this man here, David, was there on a trip to do some hunting by himself. Typically his wife, Cheryl, would go to the cabin with him, but Cheryl had to sit this one out because she was at home recovering from surgery. So David had gone out here by himself, and just as he would with any other time, he would go out without her. He agreed to call her at the end of the day to check in, let her know that he is in for the night and everything is well. Well, about 6 p.m., which is typically the latest that he would stay out, comes and goes, and she doesn't hear from David. 7 p.m., 8 p.m., and when it gets dark and late, she is sure that something is wrong. Cheryl calls her daughter and her son-in-law, the daughter's husband, lets them know what's going on and that she's worried. So the son-in-law offers to drive her up there so they can check everything out. Well, when they get there, one of the windows in the back of the cabin is slightly open. They go into the cabin, and that is where they find David laying lifeless in his kitchen in a pool of his own blood. Now, Cheryl and David's cabin is about 10 miles from the cabin that the boys were at. Not knowing whether or not the assailant was still inside the house, those two get back in the car, and they have to drive 30 whole minutes down the road before either of their phones has service and they can call 911. Now, the following day, David's car is found abandoned in a very similar fashion to the ATV. Stuck in a rut, unable to get it out, had to take off on foot. They follow his trail for a short while, but it eventually just stops and leads them nowhere. So now they get this special unit together of SWAT agents, snipers, and they go out and they conduct this manhunt to find old Benjamin. Now, they did know that Benjamin was very athletic. He spent a lot of time hiking these woods, and it was a very vast land, okay? He spent a lot of time out there, living out there, hiking out there, robbing out there, so they know that he knows the area very well. So he got that little heads up, that little leg up on him. 4 days into their manhunt, they get to this cabin and the door is unlocked. And something told one of the officers to check it out. Something about it, I think it was because the door was like slightly open or unlocked, that made him feel like they should look into it. So he is making his way through the cabin, clearing it. And unfortunately, before he gets an eye on Benjamin, who was hiding out in the cabin, Benjamin gets an eye out on him, gets a clear shot of the officer and takes several. He hits him in both arms, and all of the torso shots were actually blocked by his vest he had on. So the officer falls to the ground. They hear the commotion like the rest of the team outside of the cabin. Whole shootout ensues between Benjamin and the officers, and their number one priority was getting their man out of the house. So they go in to get him out, and while they're getting him out and getting him loaded onto the helicopter to go to safety, Benjamin slides out the back door, takes off on foot again, and they lose him. 14 more days of searching go on without a sign or a sight of Benjamin. At this point, they start appealing to the public, telling everybody to keep an eye out on him or let them know if they see the man. His face is plastered everywhere on wanted posters. And the police really need help because it's hotter than the devil's gooch outside, okay? They have on these helmets, all of their gear. They're having to carry water with them because they got to stay hydrated. It's just a lot going on that don't need to be going on, so they need help. 18 days into their manhunt, the police receive a phone call from Brady's Mini Mart, and that's about 20 miles away from where the officer was hit. The clerk says that this vase that she has seen plaster all over the news and the wanted posters, this man has just walked into the Mini Mart, got ice cream, a handful of candy bars, and walked out. He ain't paid for nothing. And I'm sure that probably wasn't the least of her concerns. So anyway, they get down there really quick. And by the time they make it, Benjamin had not gone far. There was a couple of buildings and he was right behind it, sitting there eating his ice cream and his candy bars. They surround the building. They order him to come out with his hands up. But instead, he comes out with his gun drawn. And before they allow him to hit another one of them, child, they hit him. And he is fatally hit. I knew if I told y'all all them details, y'all were going to be like, girl, that happened. Anyway, story number 2, we let him die. This story has actually been posted online to a forum. A man confessed this, claiming that this was his truth. And I'm gonna let y'all decide actually on this one, because some people in the comments of the forum were doubting his validity. I think it's a little messed up considering the fact that I'm just convinced that, let's say this is true, the kid has some issues. Like, it was the wiring of the child. And I guess I would want to believe that if they took him down to the psychiatrist's office, they did have to diagnose him with something because they were prescribing him things, right? I don't know. That's why ain't nobody's mama. Okay, but Bella's Blues and Lilith's and a whole bunch of plants. But anyway, y'all be easy with the kids. Let me know what you think down below. Like the video before you leave. Subscribe to the channel if you have not. Share the video, please. We are almost at like 200 and I don't know where we at. I think 259K. Girl, let's go ahead and get Big Mama to 300K this year. I think we're going to get past that actually. I really think we're going to end this year in the 4s. The 400,000s. Help me get there. I need you. As always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Peace. Baby, my mouth is dry. That's crazy. I just filmed this whole thing. Gotta film it again. What is up, my YouTube family? Welcome back to my channel. If this is your first time, Bella, please. If this is your first time here, then it's just welcome to my... Thank you for getting comfortable. As always, I appreciate you so much for spending your time with me.